Your first Bitcoin's the easiest. So we're at 65,000 a Bitcoin. You're going to have to make a sacrifice or two. You're just a normal family, a normal person living on a normal income. You got to make a sacrifice, but that's going to show exactly where your priorities lie. I had 8 rental properties. I sold 6 of them. Got in Bitcoin with that. Most of my stocks that like tech companies, all that stuff is gone. You don't want to hold assets that are denominated in a currency that's just falling. Someone can take something from you, it's not really yours. 2022, I got kicked out of a bank because I said the word Bitcoin. You put your money into the bank, that's the bank's money, and they'll give you access to it until they don't. Your money is a proxy of your time, and they're taking your money via taxes or inflation. They're stealing the time from you, but you can't get that time back. Both sides, the red side, the blue side, they're both fighting for access to the money machine, right? To the money printer. They need to work with the Federal Reserve so they can make up all these imaginary bills, get them passed, get them signed, create bonds out of nowhere so then the Fed can buy them, and then that creates more inflation. The richest people in the history of the world couldn't do what I'm doing right now, which is I was eating crab legs and watching YouTube. John D. Rockefeller couldn't do this. I used to wake up in the morning and look for stocks to trade, and now I just go water my grass.
You treated whatever you do, however you do, get to one whole Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a message that I really, really like. Even though I'm aware that not everyone on the earth right now, for them, it's possible to do that. But I think most of my listeners actually are capable of going there if they really want to, or they're already there. But what is it exactly of this like one Bitcoin? Why is that Bitcoin, getting the one Bitcoin so important for you?
Well, one, I believe that wherever you spend your money and how you spend your energy, your time, it shows a lot about your priorities. So to get to one Bitcoin is to say like, I'm on this journey, you know? So I think pushing yourself, because what for most people is going to require you, one, to catch Bitcoin early, or two, to make sacrifices to get there. Right. So at this price, we're at 65,000 a Bitcoin. You're going to have to make a sacrifice or two. If you're just a normal family, a normal person living on a normal income, you got to make a sacrifice, but that's going to show exactly where your priorities lie. So I also had this saying that like, your first Bitcoin is the hardest, because if Bitcoin's going up, then, when you were able to buy a Bitcoin for $2,000, $3,000 or $5,000 versus down for 65,000, that would make your first one harder, So I think once you climb that hill, you get your first one and you're like, all right, your first Bitcoin's the easiest because the price goes up, right? But it becomes like a matter of priority. So what are you willing to do to get there? And as you're learning, you start to understand the importance of, selling that fiat to get you a Bitcoin. So I think to me, it shows that this is a priority to you.
And I think you're still invested in other things, or how much of a priority for you already Bitcoin is?
So, all right. So I had 8 rental properties. I sold 6 of them, right? Got in Bitcoin with that. Most of my stocks that like tech companies, all that stuff is gone, right? So yeah, I still have some cars that are going to go. I still have those 2 rental properties that got to go, but I've been on a serious mission. So now at this point, I'm putting like maybe 80, 90% of my income away. So when 2022, when Bitcoin fell under like 25,000, that's why I was like, all right, I need to make, a decision whether I'm going to try to catch the rebound in the stock market, or I'm going to stop dabbling in Bitcoin and actually go all in, and start to make it a priority. So that's what I started doing. So I start buying and buying and buying, and I'm showing people and telling people and educating people, like, I'm going to lead by example. This is what I'm doing. I'll let you guys know I'm getting rid of this rental property. I'm getting rid of these stocks. So I kind of like documented all this for, my investment group. And I'm like, this is, I'm leading by example. Like, this is that serious to me.
It's really cool to see that. It's also like you have so many investment possibilities and opportunities. Like you have stocks, as you said, you have real estate, rental properties. You even have businesses you can buy your income and stuff like that.
Yep.
Why is Bitcoin better than all those stocks, real estate, and other opportunities? What does make Bitcoin so attractive right now?
All right. So one, all those stocks are denominated in dollars, and the value of the dollar is going down. So Like I heard Michael Saylor say, you have the best seat on the Titanic. It doesn't matter. You're still on the Titanic, you know? So that's like, that was kind of obvious. But another thing was dealing with the maintenance cost of things. So there's the cost to purchase something, and then there's the true value of that thing, right? So for instance, I live in my home, but I have to pay property taxes, or my rental properties. There's maintenance, there's insurance, there's all these things. And then you have to deal with the tenants, and you have to screen tenants, deal with their issues, and help them, apply for this voucher or do this or do that. And then when they move out, you're spending more money. So there's like a maintenance required for, let's say, real estate, so you're basically paying to upkeep your own property, right? So going down this Bitcoin journey made me realize, like, okay, well, what is ownership? So for instance, this house that I live in, I bought this house, and then every year I'm paying $50,000 in property taxes. And it makes me wonder, like, okay, do I actually own it if I have to keep paying to maintain it, right? Even though, I own it in cash, it's basically like me renting it from the government because I have to keep paying or someone's going to take it from me. So then during this journey of, learning about Bitcoin, I started realizing, like, what is ownership, So it made me question a lot of things. But one of the main things was, one, you don't want to hold assets that are denominated in a currency that's just falling. And then two, the maintenance cost of whatever that you're buying and storing your value in.
I think that's really cool. How did it change? It seems like it changed something in your perception or your definition of ownership. How did that change? Like, what did you thought before of ownership, and how do you think now about ownership?
Yeah. So what I started to realize is, like, if someone can take something from you, it's not really yours, right? Or if someone can force you to keep paying on something, it's not really yours. So I have a lot of cars. I have a car collection, right? And every year I have to pay to re-register these cars. And I'm like, even when you think like, oh, I bought this car, it's mine, it's not yours, Like, if you have to keep registering it. So what I started realizing is what these governments do is they take all these rights away from you, and then they sell them back to you, And the more I started looking at it like that, I'm like, yeah, the things that can be taken from you aren't yours. You're just renting them from the government, or until you make the wrong person mad, then they'll come take them. And that's when I started kind of like realizing, like, oh, this is like a very important aspect of Bitcoin, And I've been kicked. 2022, I got kicked out of a bank, right? And I got kicked out of a bank because I said the word Bitcoin, right? So what I was doing is, and this is Navy Federal for you guys out there watching, you Americans out there watching, especially you veterans. So I used to have to call Navy Federal to send a wire to Coinbase, right? So I can buy Bitcoin. So every day I'm sending these wires, and of course it's suspicious because I'm sending, like, a decent amount of money. And then what ends up happening is, one time they like have to transfer me. Well, they always have to transfer me to the security officer or whatever. And she asked me questions like, oh, where do the funds come from? All that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I own these businesses. I get business deposits Monday through Friday. That's where the money comes from, blah, 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 like that. She's like, oh, like, what? She's making it seem like almost like, she's actually curious. And she's like, so what kind of business is it? And I'm like, well, I have different businesses. I have e-commerce business. I have educational businesses. I have real estate businesses, She's like, oh, what do you educate people about? And I'm like, real estate, stocks, Bitcoin. She stopped me dead in my tracks. She said, oh, you have a Bitcoin business. You can't bank here. I said, no, it's not a Bitcoin business. It's an educational business. And we teach people about Bitcoin. She said, that's a Bitcoin business. Kicked me out, kicked my partner out. And I'm like, okay, then it becomes a hassle to go get the money that you have sitting in that account. And then I have credit cards with this company or with this bank. So I have to drive to the bank to go pay. And I'm like, this is such an inconvenience, And just any given second, someone can decide that you said the wrong thing, or that, whatever their bank policies are. And I'm sure they have them for good reasons, but they can just up and, kind of reroute your life and your day and, make this thing a big hassle. And you think that your first instinct is like, that's my money, And then as you start to learn about Bitcoin, you realize, like, no, you put your money into the bank. That's the bank's money. And they'll give you access to it until they don't, or until it's a security problem. And then, they got to review it. And then you can come get your money from the branch in 3 weeks. You're like, man, this is really inconvenient.
That's so crazy. Like there's a Bitcoin founder that I met on a conference, and he said, like, he founded a Bitcoin company in Austria, and he said, like, if you found anything with Bitcoin, just don't call it anything with Bitcoin because you have problems down the
Yeah.
road. Don't call it anything with Bitcoin.
Anything at all. And I kind of knew that. And I was just like, yeah, it's an educational company, like, cause that's what we do. We educate people, and she's like, oh, like, that's really cool. Like, what do you educate people about? I'm like, stocks, real estate, Bitcoin. She said, it's a Bitcoin company. I'm like, this lady right here. So it's things like that where you start to realize, like, man, like this whole system is kind of set up so you keep having to go to work, so you have to keep paying on things, right? You keep paying into the system, and then the system is kind of designed in a way where I don't necessarily know if they want to have more, let's say with taxes, or they want you to have less, right? Because the less you have, then the less sovereign you can become, and you start to realize, like, man, this game is just a big system of like taking things from people. And if your money is a proxy of your time and they're taking your money via taxes or inflation, they're stealing the time from you, but you can't get that time back, So your time is your luxury, and there's nothing that anyone can do to give you any time back, So a good way to like think about this is if you put 1,000 hours of work in exchange, you get $100,000, and then you go to the store and you're only able to spend 80,000 of it. Well, they just took 20% of that, right? So in a way, you could find a way to make more money, but you can't find a way to get those hours back. So you were robbed that way with inflation. But if they give you $100,000 and you have to pay 20,000 for taxes, it's the same thing, right? That's unpaid work that you were doing. So either way, if money is a proxy of your energy and your time, they just stole it from you. And I start thinking about things like that.
It's also crazy for me that they even ask you where the funds are coming from. Like, why do they ask if they have they a good reason for that?
Yeah, that's another thing too. You're like, well, man, like, and then what's crazy is you can like just open the account and you'll see like Stripe, like Gumroad, Stripe, and then or this like county paying real estate or like, whatever. And you're like, okay, you could kind of already see where it's coming from. Now you're questioning me about having money because it's an unnormal amount of money, but who's to say what's normal? Who's to say what's not? It's all relative. So yeah. And then I think just like the power that one person can have to be like, all right, you're out of this bank. I'm like, man, I've been banking here for like 10 years, and I say one word and it's a wrap for me, and that was pretty annoying, man.
Wait, you banked with them 10 years, and just because of that one conversation where you mentioned Bitcoin, they kicked you out?
Yeah, and they kicked my business partner out. She didn't even call them and talk to them about anything, but just her association with the business, because we both have our individual accounts, and then we have the business bank account. And they seen she was tied to the business bank account. They kicked her out too. You're like, this is crazy.
That's crazy. How much do you think this now changes with the BlackRock ETF, with the Bitcoin ETFs and the regulatory frameworks, maybe even with like a Trump in administration? Oh, sorry, you are in America, right?
Yeah.
I think you're like, what impact do you think the Trump talking about Bitcoin friendly, a Bitcoin ETF coming into the scene now? Does that change things? Is that like now the turning point for all those things where then banks all of a sudden accept Bitcoin?
Yep. So I think there's different levels of acceptance that Bitcoin will go through. And the easier or the more accepted Bitcoin is, I think the higher price people will pay. But for instance, all the Bitcoin holders that front ran BlackRock, you get in at a better price, right? Pre-ETFs, post-ETFs. But I think what happens is now you have this very large asset manager that's vouching for, this commodity. So then what happens is all their business partners will then, recognize it, to include banks, to include, your congressmen, your senators, the president itself. So yeah, I think as it becomes more and more accepted, then yeah, it'll trickle down to the banks and to individual people looking at you, to stop looking at you funny when you talk about Bitcoin, because people are like, either you're a crook or you're a criminal or you're doing something weird or you're into this magic internet money. So I think it is slowly but surely becoming like normalized. And I think if not this election, then the next election for sure, like there's going to be a lot of, this is what we're going to do for these people who are holding this token.
Yeah, it's crazy in America. I don't know if that study is true, but I saw it where there's more Bitcoin owners than dog owners. So it's like kind of like if you're against Bitcoin, you have a hard time getting elected these days.
Yeah, I don't. Nah, I wouldn't think that's true, man. Everybody out here is a damn dog. You go to the gym, everybody has a dog with them. You go to the dentist, everyone has a dog with them. And you talk about somebody, you talk to about Bitcoin with somebody, and they're looking at you like they're looking at you crazy, man. So, but yeah, I think that Bitcoin might get mentioned a little bit in this election, and we're like 3 weeks out. But I think for sure the next election is going to be a big deal.
Absolutely, really cool. Do you think that the election, like whether Trump or Harris will it be, do you think that has an actual impact on the Bitcoin price?
Nothing major. I don't think it matters. This is what I think about politics. Both sides, the red side, the blue side, they're both fighting for access to the money machine, right? To the money printer. They need to work with the Federal Reserve so they can make up all these imaginary bills, get them passed, get them signed, create these bonds out of nowhere so then the Fed can buy them, and then that creates more inflation, right? So I think that's the big thing that the American people don't see. So if me and you, for example, are running for president, and I say, if I were to say in like true terms, I say, hey, if you guys vote for me, I'll use the money printer to do X, Y, and Z. And then you'll say, hey, if you guys vote for me, I'll use the money printer to do X, Y, and Z. And then we both collectively say, but the money printer is going to be turned on, therefore there's going to be inflation, And if American people can look at it like that, maybe we'll stop being fooled so easily.
Yeah, it's true. Like no matter who you're voting for, they both will continue that fiat system.
Yeah.
What do you think is the next step for Bitcoin? We kind of have like the groundwork now laid out with the Bitcoin ETF. We have corporations now with MicroStrategy and a lot of other corporations into Bitcoin, even though it's like just in the beginning. Nation states, yes, a little bit with El Salvador, America, maybe with Trump. Germany, definitely not. They're selling their Bitcoin.
Are you in Germany?
I'm almost in Germany, like in Austria, but in Austria it's not better because we don't have any Bitcoin, so we never sold.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that's better or worse.
I've been to Austria before, actually. I used to live in Europe. So, all right, this is what I think. I think what happens next is I think there needs to be mass education, right? So one of the reasons why the fiat system keeps going is because the people in the system are also the people who oversee education, right? So if they just keep educating you in the same way or the same system saying, hey, this is what works, or this is how things are supposed to go. This is why you can get people who can get up to the master's degree level, the PhD level of economics and still have no idea what the hell is going on, So I think it's things like this podcast. I think it's things like, the people on social media who are sitting around every day educating people, because what ends up happening is, like I used to follow some Bitcoiners like maybe 2017, 2018. They start off sounding like kooky people. They're like, yeah, okay, bro. And then the price goes up, and not that you're only in it for the price to go up, but it kind of validates what they're saying, and then you have things like donation funds from the truckers in Canada being put on hold. And then you have things like there's these things that happen in society that kind of lead to evidence as like, okay, maybe these orange pill people aren't wrong, It's when all these conspiracies become coincidences, and then you're like slowly but surely, but there's a multiplier effect, these things compound. So when you have people out there who can create a podcast and then get, let's say you do a podcast and it gets 10,000 views, right? And you're looking at it because you're the podcast creator and you're like, oh, 10,000 people, 5,000 people. You don't realize that people they watch it, and then no one's just going to watch something, find it interesting, and not tell their brother about it or not tell their coworker about it, right? These are conversations that people have every day. So then those people are like, hey, like actually I was learning about this, and then it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. Right. So everything compounds. So even when you think of the smallest podcast, the Bitcoin podcast, I end up finding them and they get 88 views. And I'm like, man, this is some good stuff right here, you know? And then I turn and I talk to my circle of friends about it, and everything just kind of compounds. So I think one of the major things, one of the major steps is the individual people, right? The individual people self-educating. Because if we're going to sit back and wait on the system, then what's going to happen is it's going to take forever. We're going to just play the fiat game, right? It's going to take forever. It needs to be passed by through the school district, which means the state needs to approve of it, which means the people in the state need to approve of it. The governor needs to approve of it, but maybe he doesn't. So now you got people in 23 states being educated about, Bitcoin, or even like the train of thought from the Austrian School of Economics. And then you have the other states that are like, no, we're not doing that. So I think it starts with the people in each person, and then the kind of the proof or the backbone in this hey, the system works is you're like, hey, we have these outlets. Look, even BlackRock is allowing people to buy ETF, or you can go to this company and buy it yourself. You can self custody with these people, which are usually just everyday people who are creating products. So I think the work's going to be done from the inside out. It's going to start with the orange pill people, and it's just going to spread and spread and spread, and I think that's why when you see people like Jack Mallers talking to NFL players, very prominent NFL players at that, you're like, this is crazy. Like, this guy's a leader on a professional football team. You think he's going to go in the locker room and just be quiet, Like, of course he's not. And then, of course, like after the game, they win, everyone's talking, and then the price of Bitcoin shoots up like it does today. And they're like, hey, man, like, so you took your contract in, or you took your endorsements in Bitcoin, huh? Like, these things spread, and these people have influence. So I've seen Michael Saylor comment on Ronaldo's tweet yesterday, and I'm like, these things spread like crazy, but it's going to start from the inside out.
I saw that tweet. I think Ronaldo brings out like watches or something like that, like a watch collection. And I thought like, hey, there's a Bitcoin watch collection also.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I was there. I had like a watch collection that I was looking at like an investment. And what ended up happening is I was thinking like, okay, here's the demand for these watches, right? And then here's the supply. And I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. Every watch I was buying is, as soon as you walk out of Rolex, it's up 40%, or Vacheron or whatever, you're up 40, 50%. And then at a moment's notice, they just snap their fingers, boom, more supply, and you're like, this is a fiat game. This is a fiat game that you're trying to play. And it goes to show that like the inability to save your time and your energy, which is, your money, it leads you to gambling. And that's how I started looking at my former self. Like, man, that was gambling.
That's so interesting. Yeah. It's also this all for kind of connects, like the education system is really bad, but now we're getting a new like decentralized education system with social media, with the podcast, with all those things. Then we have like this inflation, this 9-to-5 rat race, which also gets better with Bitcoin and online education. It's kind of all connected for me, and I kind of like, I feel like we're entering in a new world era where people are way more free if they really want to. Like, it's now on everyone's mind. Like, if you can afford a phone, you don't have an excuse anymore. Like, if you own an interconnection is like almost everything you need to like conquer the world these days. It's crazy to think about that, but I love the implications of that, and I love how you also explain that.
Yeah, the education matters a lot, because that's what gets people to hold when, or to hodl when it goes down. That's what gets people to buy in when it goes down. It's when people are afraid to buy the dip, is because they don't have a very thorough understanding, right? They don't have a thorough understanding of how this system works, or how Bitcoin works, or why this thing is valuable. So they're like, it's going down. Maybe, they're paper hands, or maybe they buy more, but it's all from education, right? And I was making a joke yesterday that like the richest people in the history of the world couldn't do, this was last night at dinner, I'm like, couldn't do what I'm doing right now, which is I was eating crab legs and watching YouTube, right? And I'm like, John D. Rockefeller couldn't do this, right? Like Mansa Musa couldn't get crab legs right here and sit and have someone who he does not know and just sit here and educate him on something, and you're like, this is what's cool. Like the technology has empowered everybody, but it's on the individual person to actually like apply it, to reach out, and you build your own like ecosystem on the internet, the people you follow. It's really like you versus your attention span at this point.
Yeah, it's like the average person in 2024 is way richer than the richest guy like a few
Yeah.
100 years ago.
Yeah, I'm like, man, you could have been as rich as you want to, but you didn't have plumbing. like, this is a cool time to live in, you know? I have plumbing, I have air conditioning. People gather crabs for me to eat, and I get to sit and watch some guy across the world talk about, you know, this magic internet money. I kind of like my life, you know? It's pretty cool.
What a time to be alive. Really cool. What do you think primed you to understand Bitcoin? Because I feel like even like there are a lot of rich dudes, a lot of smart dudes that have no clue about Bitcoin. And it's just like a very small group of people that actually understand and grasp Bitcoin right now. What do
Yeah.
you think primed you to actually understand it?
All right. So before I had any type of like real money, like I was paying attention to Bitcoin, right? So my first Bitcoin buy was in 2017. And it was strictly for the purpose of trying to make more money, right? So me and my cousin Johnny were just like halfway reading these books, halfway kind of paying attention, you know, but we're just like, we want the number to go up, you know? So I'm thinking I'm some mad scientist and I buy it 3,000, sell it 6,000. I think I'm the king of the world. It goes up to 20,000. And then I'm sitting here looking at my cousin like, bro, what did we do wrong? You know? So then it crashes. And then I'm like, well, I guess I did that right. You know, like I didn't miss out. So then what ended up happening is like 2019, I'm like buying in as I'm starting to make more money. I'm buying in. I'd buy a whole coin for $4,000, sell it for 7,000, or buy it for 8 and sell it for 12. And I'm just thinking, I'm like thinking like a trader, you know. But how the saying goes, like you come for the number go up and you stay for the revolution, you know. So then what would happen is I would start following traders who would like trade Bitcoin, and you know, I'm like, all right, this is pretty cool, you know. And then I started to find like people who were like very deeply into this, you know, like Naval, for example, right? So you know and follow Naval, Naval
No, actually
Ravikant.
not.
Oh
Ma- ma-
man,
ma-
this
ma-
guy.
ma- ma- Maybe I know him from like profile, but this name doesn't ring a bell now.
I'll send you his profile. He's some profound guy, but he's a angel investor in Silicon Valley, but he's also like a philosopher, right? So I would like listen to some of the podcasts and stuff he would do, and he would talk about like the impact of cryptocurrency and things like that. And then I'm like, oh, this is crazy. You know who he is now?
I know him. I googled him. Yeah, I know this
Yeah, yeah,
guy.
yeah. So
Naval Ravikant.
yep. So as I'm like listening to him, and then like, you know, he would say little things, like he has this old tweet that would say like basically you're either left to play the wealth game or the status game, right? So the status game is, you know, where you went to school, kind of car you drive, the jewelry you wear, like who you hang out, where you hang out with, like that, right? Or you can choose to play the wealth game, and the wealth game is how long can you survive without another paycheck. So he said that, and I'm like, whoa, like, you know, that's actually deep. So I start paying attention to him, start listening. And then he kind of led me down this rabbit hole. And I'm like, man, okay, why are these people buying Bitcoin and saying they're never going to sell when I'm just turning a profit, like, you know, every few months? So I started kind of paying attention, and I'm like, okay, this is something that you can hold. So then what happened is during COVID, when they printed off all that money, I already understood the impact of it. You know, and I'm like, oh, this is why people are like, it's not necessarily a hedge to inflation, but a solution to inflation, right? Because at any given moment, we're always one event away from them stroking the pen. And now we're going to flood the whole global economy with more money. And now the cost of living is going up. And then you start to put two and two together. Like the price of these assets are going up because they're propped up by all the global liquidity, you know, or the M2 money supply, the global money supply. They send assets up. They send your real estate up. They're what's propping, you know, Bitcoin to go up too. And you're like, all this new money has to find a home, right? So if all this new money has to find a home, and it's going to find a home in real estate, well, they're just going to build a house right next to yours, right? And or if all this money finds a home in stocks, and then the company can say, let's issue more shares. So therefore you just been diluted, right? So everything, like I was saying too about watches, so everything that can grow like horizontally, you could just keep making more and more of it. You're just being slowly diluted, although the nominal value is going up. So then I started to it really started to click like, hey, well, if you can't grow this thing, Bitcoin, this way, it has to grow this way, right? So that's when it started to click. And I'm like, oh, okay. So the more they pump money into the system, it's going to benefit the holders, but it's going to benefit them at a much higher rate than real estate or stocks will, because you can't just duplicate duplicate Bitcoin like you could a stock or like real estate, So you can have a nice house in a nice area and they'll just chop down some trees and build a really nice, cool house next to you. And it's just slowly diluting you.
If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the Bitbox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your Bitbox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really, really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin Way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. And last but not least, I have something completely new for you guys. I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. And make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. Absolutely, that's once you realize that, like, then it's like almost game over. You're like just like DCA all the way.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And then I think too, you get to a point and you're learning, because I think naturally people who especially come for the NGU, like they're like, man, I can't wait for Bitcoin to hit this price and this price or this price. I'm gonna sell out and I'm gonna buy this, I'm gonna buy that. And eventually when when you're on your journey, you come to this understanding that, like, why would I sell my Bitcoin for dollars? Like, that's a pretty stupid trade, and I think once that hits you, then you understand, like, oh, this is a revolution, like you can't tempt me with however many dollars you're going to offer me, because I know you're going to offer me a lot of money in the future for something that you can't control, and the point is, when you go to sleep at night and you wake up, you're that much more poor because they just put more money into the ecosystem. And I think that's when it really starts to hit, like, this is way bigger than just building your wealth.
Do you think at some point everyone will realize that with Bitcoin, or they just use it because they are group pressured into it, and it's Bitcoin is just like the foundation of the financial system? It's kind of like the TCP/IP protocol. Everyone uses it, but nobody really understands it. Like, how do you think that will go with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I don't think everyone's going to look at it like it's a revolution. I think some people are going to try to ride the train, get some money, sell out, get a nice car, maybe even buy a home, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But no, I don't think that everyone's going to like understand the impact that this could have because we don't understand the system itself, right? So if we don't understand how the IMF is screwing countries over, or how the Federal Reserve is kind of like turning us into like tax slaves, like if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand the point of like holding your Bitcoin and not going back into that system, right? To sell your Bitcoins to go back into that system. So I don't think everyone's going to understand that, but I do think that there will be people who understand that. And I also think there's going to be corporations who understand that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The corporations will be a huge wave. I feel like in the coming years, they
Yeah.
are starting to really get it these days. But do you think that Bitcoin has the potential to make an impact on society? Like to there's this popular saying, "Fix the money, fix the world." Is that
Yeah.
actually true?
Yeah, I think it has the potential because I think it's doing it already. Like, haven't you noticed that since you started paying attention to Bitcoin, things just start changing, right? You start valuing things a little different. You're like, I'll put more emphasis on the future, or like I want to get a little more healthy. You kind of just and then it makes you align with people who have values that are similar to yours. If I know somebody's a Bitcoiner, I kind of like give them the benefit of the doubt. Like I'm like, this person's probably cool. Because to understand what is going on, you're like, I know that you had to dig deep, and so I think it changes people at the individual level. But then you have to understand that individual people is what makes up companies, or what makes up governments, or what makes up countries. It's the individual person, and I think sometimes that we overlook how far someone's impact can go. So if Bitcoin can change me, and then I change the 5 people closest to me, and then they change 2 people next to them, or look how impactful someone like Michael Saylor could be, So yeah, I think that it for sure could underline or undermine what the system that's going on, and make people start to ask questions, because how much longer can you hear people say that, hey, they keep printing money and this is, causing inflation? And how much longer can, like, let's say normies just say, no, that's not true. And then it keep happening and keep happening and keep happening. Like how much longer can you go on before, how much longer can this go on before people say like, all right, maybe you're right, bro. Maybe you're right. Right. Or even like when it comes to like politics and you say, all right, they're telling you all these things that they're going to do, but ask them how they're going to pay for it. Eventually people are going to say like, you know what, maybe you're right. How are you guys going to pay for it? They're going to borrow money. Well, that's going to cause more inflation. So I think each person, being their own little beacon will eventually change the world, because these corporations, these countries, nation states, all these things are just made up of individual people.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so funny for me because when I hear like they print more money to fix inflation, like you know this politics with like the Inflation Reduction Act, and they print a bunch of money to go
how that
to
worked
go
out
that.
for them. And it's crazy because like when you say it to people who kind of aren't paying attention, you kind of sound like a conspiracy theorist, But eventually they start complaining about those grocery prices, and you're like, tried to tell you a few years ago,
I feel like the pain has to grow before people actually start to wake up and actually pay attention to it. How has we talked a little bit about time, and it kind of also goes into the freedom. How has your definition or your view at time and your value at time, and also maybe your definition and value of freedom changed with Bitcoin?
So before Bitcoin, right? And I would say before I was like very like orange pilled. So before this, when I was kind of like fiat thinking, when I would wake up in the morning, the first thing that would be on my mind is make more money, right? I was just strictly on a mission to get wealthier. Like, what does my company need to do? What does that company need to do? What stocks are moving? What stocks are undervalued? Can I buy? What can I? And all this is just to make more money, right? And then when you make more money, you realize like, I need to make even more money, And then it's like you go up, but then the cost of living goes up. And you go up and the cost of living goes up, right? So you're like, man, like I thought maybe 10 years ago, I thought that maybe if I had X amount of money, I would just feel comfortable. But you can't, because that thing is chasing you, which is inflation is chasing you, right? So all my time was just going to like growing businesses and making more money. So then after Bitcoin, what ends up happening is I started looking at my time like, okay, I want to spend my time learning. I want to spend my time with my children. I want to spend my time doing all these things that have nothing to do with making money. And I can do that as long as my savings account isn't just deflating, right? So as long as my savings account isn't deflating, then I'm like, okay, cool. I don't feel the pressure anymore. This morning I was going to tweet it, which I'll probably tweet tomorrow, but I was going to say like, I used to wake up in the morning and look for stocks to trade. And now I just go water my grass, like I don't feel the pressure anymore. Now, on top of not feeling the pressure anymore, it just makes me think like longer term, like I know Bitcoin will get to where it's going to get eventually. I'm just going to focus on what's in front of me, and stack sats. That's it. So whenever I get some fiat, I'll sell it in exchange for some sats. And then I'm going to do the things that I like to do.
I love that so much. Before Bitcoin, I went out and the first thing I looked for stocks, and now I water my grass. That's so deep ingrained in the Bitcoin community. Like that really resonates. And I have interviewed a lot of Bitcoiners. You are my 277th podcast, so I'm approaching the 300 people. So I kind of get to know like who's a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
And that's so characteristic for a Bitcoiner who was just in pursuit of money and found like happiness, found like this low time preference Bitcoin thing. And I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that.
It's really the journey. It's the journey. It sounds so cliche, but it's like, it's the journey, man. Because no one tells you to, hey, stop thinking about getting Lambos when your Bitcoin goes up. No one tells you that. You kind of naturally come to that like, man, these people are just making crap. Like even the devices that you buy, the things you buy from the store aren't made well anymore. Like everything is just real fast. There's no quality. It's just everything's just quantity. Then you start seeing that with people. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to spend my time with people who value the same things that I value. And then I started looking at labor that way, right? So my original saying is get money by income, right? But that was I started thinking that's kind of like fiat because you're getting money to buy income producing assets, right? And these income producing assets are all tied into the fiat world. So then I started thinking it's like, you provide value and store value. That's the new model, right? Like, so I start looking at my labor different. Like there's things that I'm not willing to do for money. Like for instance, talk to somebody or have a one-on-one consultation, or like, you can't pay me to sit and hang out with you or to talk to you, or I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm going to come talk to you for free if I want to talk to you. That's it, right? Or if I want to work, then I'm going to make sure that it's tied into love, like the labor is things that I actually want to do, like, hey, I want to do this thing because it's going to help people, right? And I just started looking at everything like just slightly different, So now I'm more like you provide value and then you store your values, because when you provide value to people, they'll exchange it for money. And then you need to store your value away. And we know the best thing to store your value in, right? So you provide value, store value. And I'm like, man, it's kind of like just change. It changes you from the inside,
What do you think is harder, making money or like providing value, or like keeping money and storing money?
Storing money. That's a way harder game, man. There's 52 million millionaires in the entire world, right? So if you think about this, there's probably like 300 people in the NBA, right? For example, there's 400 people in the NBA, right? So that should tell you like being a professional basketball is exponentially harder than making a lot of money, right? So the thing is, I think where we kind of get confused with the making money part is we don't understand that you have to go help someone else, right? So we only think about making money because we think about what we want. But if I told you like, hey, I have this solution for you to grow your podcast, 10,000 extra listeners a month in exchange for $5,000. If that's valuable for you, you'll pay me, right? But what I'm leading with is how I'm going to help you, not what I'm going to get out of it. So if I wake up and say, hey, I need $5,000 because I want to go buy this or I want to go on vacation, then you're walking around looking for someone willing to give you $5,000. But instead, if you look at it like, how can I help this person? Maybe this person needs to lose weight. Maybe this person needs to grow their whatever, their podcast. Maybe this person needs a new tire. Maybe this person needs their wheels aligned on their car. So then you start like, what's valuable to other people? How can I serve other people? And if you get that to click, what can I do to solve other people? I mean, to serve other people, then you realize that, the skill of making money is just solving problems, and we'll never run out of problems. Like we're humans, we have all these problems and we'll never run out of these problems. Therefore, there's always an opportunity to help somebody. In exchange, they'll give you some money, So I think the making money part, it clicked kind of early to me. The storing money part becomes a whole different ball game because, like I was saying, if you don't have something sound to store your value in, it turns you into a gambler. And the gambling mentality is hard to get out of. And a lot of times you think you're investing, but you're really gambling, right? Or you think you're trading, but you're really gambling, right? So, for instance, I traded crypto, stocks, bet on sports, all these things. So I'll give you the analogy of like betting on sports, right? When you bet on sports, two teams are playing against each other. One of them has to win, right? You go buy a stock that you think is providing value, but there's all these moving components in the background that you don't even understand are there. You're not privy to that information, right? So although it sounds a lot better, like, well, I'm going to invest in this stock, and you're like, you don't realize you don't have enough information to make a solid decision, therefore you're gambling, right? So I started thinking about it like this, or, you go put your money in some crypto token because it's supposed to go up and then it tanks. And then you realize one day that some developer who developed this token also developed this other token. And then they paid some influencer to put it in front of your face and you became a victim to the algorithm. That was gambling, right? So when you don't have a solid place to store the value that you've created, you start gambling, right? So whether you're, sports betting or whether you're trading stocks or trading shit coins or all these things, even, investing in watches, like you're like, man, those materials can be made very easily, So, or flipping real estate, all these things, they start to sound or seem like gambling to you when you kind of understand what's going on, So then, not that there's anything wrong with taking calculated risks, but it makes you realize that, okay, I see my Bitcoin as a savings account, right? I bought some MicroStrategy the other day. I see that as an investment, right? So it's like 99.8% of my savings account sitting in this thing. I want to speculate a little bit with this company. Here's an investment. Versus the fiat way to do this would be 99% of my money is invested into these companies and I have a little bit saved, just in case. Because I have to absolutely get wealthier, So it just swaps everything around for you, and then you can just sit down and chill.
I love that perspective so much. Really, really cool. And this Zen moment where like, oh, I just store my financial energy in Bitcoin. This really brings something, and it allows you to really focus on just providing value for other people. Yeah. Kind of the origin story of this podcast, kind of. Yeah, really cool. One last thing before we get to the end routine that I really want to get into with you. Being that disciplined and being like, oh, like I know where Bitcoin is going. There's like two factors that really keep like people engaged with Bitcoin. The first factor is always like the price, especially for newbies. Like the price tags, like in 10 years time we will get there, and then only in the second order they actually think of like, oh, like why Bitcoin and what are the educational values of that, and why is it so valuable for us? Do you have for the first thing, especially for the newbies, models, or like what do you think of price models for Bitcoin, where it's going to in the long term? Or are you just like, oh, I love the fundamentals and I just know my money will be safe there? How do you look at that?
So, all right, this is the way I think about the price, right? So I used to think like, all right, when Bitcoin goes to this price, I'm going to have X amount of money. And then I started realizing like, okay, if I sell my fiat right now, because that's what you do when you buy your Bitcoin, you're selling your fiat, right? If I sell my fiat, I know my money isn't being stolen from me, right? So I started looking at it like that. Like, That's why I'm willing to buy Bitcoin at higher prices, right? So when it goes up, I'll buy it. When it goes down, I'll buy it. When it stays in the middle, I'll buy it, because I'm like, I need to get rid of this thing that's allowing people to steal my time. And if I value my time, why would I let someone steal it? Right? So that's the way that I look at it now. I'm like, well, if I keep this money sitting here and every day the money printer is going burr, so I know I'm getting poor. I know they're stealing from me. So the one thing that I say is like Bitcoin might go up and down on its way up, but fiat's going down only, right? It's going straight down. It's a roller coaster straight down. And then when you get to the bottom of that pit, you're going to wish you jumped off of that roller coaster onto something else just to give yourself some type of fighting chance, because you have no fighting chance with, you know, your fiat currency, especially like, well, let's say like I'm American, so the dollar, right? You know where the dollar's going, because when you grew up, a can of soda is 25 cents. Now it's $1.70, you know, and the soda didn't taste any better. Doesn't make you any happier. Doesn't do anything, you know, doesn't do anything special except the price went up. So one, you have to give yourself a fighting chance, and to give yourself a fighting chance, you got to dump the fiat. So I started looking at it like that.
I love the way that you look at it. Like that makes a lot of sense. Really, really cool. We have one question always for every guest. And the question is always the same one. What can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
How to spend your time. How to spend your time, right? Like, so my version of the American dream, and I know a lot of Europeans share this dream, but you're financially free, right? Which means you can spend, you know, on the things that you actually care about, and you can earn as much as you want. You know, there's no limits. Then you have your time freedom, right? And that's the freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it. And then the third part is your location freedom. You can go where you want to go, stay as long as you want to stay, right? So I think, like I said, when we started this podcast, how you spend your time says a lot about yourself, right? And how you spend your money will dictate how you spend your time. Because if you tie all your money into buying things that, let's say, financing cars or spending on credit cards, then you have to spend your time to pay those things off, right? So those two are very, very, very correlated, right? So besides Bitcoin, to put time at the very, very forefront of what's valuable to you, right? So if you go work all day and then you decide like, hey, I'm going to go to the mall and buy X, Y, and Z, well, you just disrespected the time that you put in to get the money, right? So that is one. And then two, the other part, which I attribute a lot of, you know, to where I've come from and where I'm at, I attribute a lot of it to curiosity, right? So I would say to stay curious about life, to stay curious about the world, and to always learn something, you know, like always, you know, keep a book open, keep podcasts, like question everything, you know. I remember being 10 years old and just having crazy amounts of questions from my mom. She's like, boy, shut up. You know, like I asked too many questions, but that curiosity is what allows you to kind of like challenge what you think you know. And that's where you start making your progress, you know. So stay curious, even if it's not money related. Like the other day on Twitter, everyone's going crazy about whatever it was they were going crazy about. And I followed the science page and they were showing the exact place where they found how leaves breathe, right? Like leaves take breaths, like a lung, it opens and it closes. And I'm like, this is the most intriguing thing ever. But the algorithm has stole everyone's attention. So they care about this story or this. They're like, bro, you don't care about how, like, you know, these leaves are like, I don't know. So it's just curiosity, man. It's just curiosity, and curiosity will take you far. And my curiosity to like how the world works and how money works and why we have to get up and leave our homes to go to work, you know, and why we stay stuck in that track. It's just curiosity. It was curiosity that led me here. So how you spend your time and to stay curious. Those are the main things.
I love that a lot. Really, really cool. I think if everyone tomorrow starts to value their time and be curious, they would we would have a lot of people that would quit their job and would try to do something else.
Yeah, or maybe you don't quit your job, but maybe you see your job as like a stepping stone, you know. And if you see your job as a stepping stone, I'm willing to bet you'd be willing to go harder, you know. So you can work and do things you love, right? But not everyone's in that position. Some people have to do it because they have to do it, right? But if you say, all right, well, if I put in 48 months here, right? And then I have enough money to do this or do that or whatever. You go hard because you realize like, hey, those 48 months, I need to make as much money as possible. So now let me look for opportunities to help this organization so I can get a promotion. I know this is only 48 months, so let me go harder, you know? So when you have no respect for your time, you don't care about like, hey, I'm sitting around at this job, I don't really do much, but they pay me to do nothing. And you're like, well, they're wasting your time and you're wasting your time, you know? So you put some more respect on your time and, you know, you demand better from yourself. Then even if you're doing those jobs you don't want to do, you do it like, and this is, you know, a building block. So I can just, you know, brick by brick, I can build something up.
Very true. Really, really cool. I love that. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the question for you from the previous guest is, if Bitcoin went to $1 million, what would you treat yourself?
Well, probably go buy a car from the 60s, but with my fiat. That, a lot of ice cream. That's it. I just want an old school car and probably some ice cream and some crab legs, and I'll be all right. But I like to do it to say, like, I told you, you know, like I'd go start bringing up all my old tweets, like, yeah, I should have listened. Or sometimes what I do is, when people troll, like let's say when I was buying Bitcoin when it crashed down to 15,000 and people go, oh, you threw your money away. I just go leave them a winky face, you know, like 4 years later, I have a response for you now, you know, because only time will tell. You'll be judged by your work in the future, you know, not today. The things that I say today might not make sense for a few years. The podcast you have, the episodes you have, the concepts that you talk about, it might not make sense to people right now. You know, you might not have the best podcast until 30 years. You know, 30 years, they'll go back and they say, oh my goodness, these people were onto it. You know, that's how I feel about cypherpunks right now. I'm like, whoa, these guys were laying the foundation for Satoshi if he wasn't one of them, which I'm sure he was. But like, this is crazy. Like, this is, you know, 10 years before Bitcoin was created, there were people out there who were interested in cryptography and, you know, using technology as a way to free people. So it's kind of a rant, but yeah, that's my answer.
I love that a lot. Really cool. Thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, read more about you?
So on Instagram, it's Chris with 4 S's and Johnson. So Chris Johnson. On Twitter, it's CJ_Johnson17TH. So yeah, you guys can hit me up there, bug me, DM me. I'll get back to you.
Perfect. Really cool. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Cool.